I'm taking my freedom, pulling it off the shelf, putting it on a chain and wearing it round my neck. I'm taking my freedom, putting it in my car, wherever I choose to go. It will take me far. I'm living my life like it's golden, 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 golden. We are golden. I am so grateful to be here in this space with you all today. My name is Brittany Grady, and I will be the gracious moderator of Powerful Women, Powerful Voices in this space that Jay Lachey, the artist, has curated for us today. I want to extend gratitude for each of you all participating and for each of the voices that you will hear on the panel. And also remind you all that this is a space that is meant to be a celebration of Black women's divinity, of our possibility, of who we truly are. And so I want to make sure that we are invigorating that energy within this space. So that is why I began with the song Golden, because sometimes we need the reminder that we are indeed golden. So I will go ahead and jump right into it by asking the artist, Jay Lachey, what her intention is primarily for this space, particularly what brought you to this moment in time, Jay?
That's a big question. There's a lot that goes into what brought me to this place, but I'll say the intention for this space is to invite curiosity. My background, as I was sharing with the panelists a little bit earlier, is I'm an educator who began teaching history right after being an activist. And so in studying history at an HBCU, I learned a lot about colonization and decolonization and the ways in which it impacts our psychology. One of the things that happened for me there was seeing the juxtaposition of this information I got from this place, which told me about Africans being the first humans in the world, which told me about us having sciences that we now discount in the Western world. So those are the things that started me on this journey of asking questions about colonization. But the truth of the matter is I come from a family of people who taught me how to ask questions and study independently. When I asked my mama a question, she would say, go look it up. And so my habit was one in which I would always have to go study. And she also started me on the path of self-study. When I was 16 years old and I wanted to date, she gave me 33 essays that I had to write, of 5,000 word limit to 1,000 word limit, but I had to write all of them. Who are you? Why are you here in the world? What do you know about your purpose? Like, she asked me those questions when I was about 15 years old. I still didn't get to date, but it taught me a lot about what I did know and didn't know about myself. And it taught me the process of asking questions. So the intention for this place, for this space, was to start us all in a space of curiosity about self as a source of truth in a world that tells us to question everything. To also think about, like, when we call things a coincidence or a happy, magical circumstance, is it so? Or maybe is it like truth? Is it science? Is it real? Who's to say? So how do we start to ask the questions about where our sources of truth and freedom, et cetera, come from? That's what this was. And finally, it's really just about affirming the divinity of us. Another thing that happened along this journey was I started finding out that before this Western world ideology that we live in, people were worshiping wombs. They were worshiping women. And in a book that I read called When God Was a Woman, it's right here, the author proposes that one of the early definitions of pagan was people who worshiped female gods. That stopped me in my tracks. And I was like, hold up, I grew up all my life believing that pagan was some kind of devil thing. And it turns out it was people who were worshiping female gods. And so that, that started me in this like rabbit hole. And that brought me to today. So there's a lot that happened that got me to this point, but I wanted us to come together to ask questions together of ourselves and the world.
Well, I mean, that, you know, we talk all the time. Jay and I are dear friends. And every single time I hear you share your story and where you have come from and what your understanding has evolved toward is so powerful. I know personally that you have been an artist, an activist, an educator. You have been and are also all of those things. As you vacillated through those different spaces, in different ways, your energy is interacting with other people and finding your personal truth. How did that allow you to better understand the divine feminine?
Okay, tell me that question one more time. Give me 9 words.
Okay, there we go. It wasn't letting me unmute myself. 9 words, all of your roles spew from you, flow from you, right? How did that allow you to realize that you are divine?
Ooh. There was an experiment that happened. I got real sick at one point. And when I got real sick, I was in a situation where I had to decide if I was going to go with conventional understanding of how to solve this problem. And in this conventional understanding, there was no solution to this problem. I could just manage. And then there's this other understanding that comes from the old world that said everything has a solution. There are infinite possibilities. And it was in that moment that I was like, okay, I got to experiment. I experimented with intuition, with this thing that happens in me that tells me something, even though I don't have quote unquote proof, but speaks to me and tells me a truth that oftentimes when I go against it, it gets me in trouble. And so I tried this new route where I was like, let me try to go with this intuition thing. I can't prove it, but it's telling me something. And so I started doing that. And my life just dramatically changed. Wow. The things that people call magic, being able to speak things out and they come to you, being able to like have a wish for a 6-figure income when you have no job, and then all of a sudden, bam, bam, bam. So this started to happen. And that is when I was like, okay, there's something divine here that's opposite of what I've been taught in this world. Let me discover more. And I revisited the Bible, because when I left the church, I just decided, well, I'm done with all of it. But I revisited the Bible and read verses again through this lens. And one of the things that I thought about was like, there's so much that's described about God in an abstract lens that when you think about the Black woman or the female body or the womb are very practical things. Last year when I ran this event, I talked to the people about this idea of the land of milk and honey. And I was like, well, I know some milk and honey can come from this land. I thought about the verse of flesh of my flesh, blood of my blood, and how literal that is. I am literally my mother's flesh and blood. And so when we change the way in which we look at this information, we can see very divine things in ourselves practically. And so that made me want to question again, like, why do we look at things so abstractly? And what is the relationship between that and the patriarchy that we live under?
Wow. We are living under a patriarchy, that's for sure. But that exploration is critical, and it's also what is so foundational and fundamental to this space. And so I am grateful to you for asking those questions, for allowing yourself that curiosity. And I will also go ahead and allow us to continue to explore with the rest of our panel. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. First up, we have Iya Oshundara, affectionately known as Tam or Bruja Benton on social media. She's a native New Yorker residing in Baltimore. She came into tarot after actively exploring, again, the exploration piece, different forms of spirituality and wanting to strengthen her connection with the divine and her own intuition. You're starting to see a theme here, right? Spiritual journey led her to practicing the African traditional religion of Ifa o Isheshe. Thank you. And she was initiated to Oshun in 2019 and is a priestess of Oshun. Very popularly known, and people speak a lot about her as a defined feminine figure. So really excited to have you with us, Iya.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Tasha Dixon, also known as the founder of Spirit Knows Best. Tasha is a certified life purpose and spiritual coach. Her passion is to empower those who have heard the call of their own soul. She is a beacon of freedom for those who understand there is more to life than the physical. A natural leader and motivator, her passion and purpose is to help people understand the importance of spiritual freedom and sovereignty as a divine birthright. As I mentioned, she is the owner of Spirit Knows Best, which is a company that specializes in metaphysical and spiritual products, as well as coaching and mentoring. So you have two people who can provide you with products to take you on this journey in this particular chat. And also empowers people to boldly walk their personal paths and honor what speaks to their souls. So thank you so much, Tasha. I can't wait to hear what you share in this space.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And then up next, we have Reverend Dr. Courtney Bryant, who is a Christian ethicist who explores the erotic strategies of Black women in America and their success as tools of liberation. From a womanist perspective, I too am a womanist, and always shout out to the womanism perspective. It's so important. We give honor to you, Alice Walker. Seminary trained at Duke Divinity School, Dr. Bryant was duly ordained by the American and National Baptist Conferences in 2012. In 2018, Dr. Bryant received her doctorate in religion, ethics, and society at Vanderbilt University, and now teaches at Manhattan College, where as a womanist scholar, she teaches Black women's theological perspectives on the erotic, embodiment, and Black subjectivity, as well as sexual gender ethics and justice in Christian communities. Dr. Bryant is currently working on her first monograph entitled Erotic Defiance, a Womanist Ethic of Moral and Political Agency, slated for publication in 2022, on the way. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Courtney, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
And last but certainly not least is Lavon Briggs, aka Pastor Bay, who's looking like Bay today, as per usual. Pastor Bay is an Emmy Award winner, a body and sex positive womanist preacher, writer, transformational speaker, and spiritual life and liberation coach. She is the founder of Beautiful Scars, a healing-centered storytelling agency focused on fostering pleasure and resiliency, and the curator of the Proverbial Experience, a series of virtual spiritual gatherings to nourish your soul. I have attended. They do nourish your soul. It's tomorrow. And Briggs has been featured in Essence, Cosmopolitan, and the Washington Post magazines. And Sojourners named her as one of 11 women shaping the church. Briggs is a New York City native, and there are a few other New York City natives in this group, and currently based in New Orleans, Louisiana. So thank you to all of you for joining. Thank you so much. As the audience can definitely tell, we have like I said, a powerhouse, and frankly, anything with Black women is going to be that. So know that. Also, Christianity is our launching off point, but this is a pluralist space. And so we are making room for all religious traditions, all spirituality, all practices, because what our real hope is for you to find a piece of truth within what we are sharing in this space, honestly and earnestly, and that it will also take you on that path to spiritual and self-exploration for yourself. So for the first question, first of all, again, thank you to each of you. And to get us started, I want each of you to answer the question, why did you say yes to this panel? And when did you last see Jesus? Where was she? I'll go ahead and start with Miss J, since this is her curation.
Me? Oh, okay. I see Jesus every day. I see her every day. It is in the the mother, it is in the magician, it is in, like, I see her every day. And when I think about this word savior, a couple of years ago, I wrote about this. How many Black women have saved me? How many times have I been saved by Black women? And so I see her in every moment. I see her now. And so saying yes to this panel is really just about a celebration of us and of this genius. At heart, I love organizing people and I love loving on people. So that's me.
Do we have anybody that wants to jump in, or do I have to pull out my teacher hat and call on someone?
I'll
Tasha,
jump
you want to
in.
jump in? Okay.
Me? Okay. All right. So, hi. Wait, am I next? Brittany?
Yeah, you're next, Tasha.
Okay,
It's
all
on you.
Hi. Okay. So, I said yes to this panel so that I could get an opportunity to come together with other women, other Black women, and discuss true divinity. It's not something that we were raised to even consider ourselves as divine. And so just the opportunity to get a chance to come together with you all so that we can discuss it, and not only discuss it from one point of view, but discuss it from several points of view. And that gives me the opportunity to consider other perspectives, and then maybe also consider how I can incorporate that if necessary into my practice. Wait, what was the second question? Oh, Jesus. Okay.
Jesus.
Okay. So, okay, like Jay, I do see Jesus every day. But when I see Jesus and when I think about Jesus symbolically and what he has represented, even myself being a former Christian, is he represented several things. One, he represented redemption. Okay. And so when I think about when I see Jesus, I see when I look in the mirror. And then when I talk to other people, I want them to see their own savior in the mirror, despite the support that you may get from other people. And that's absolutely wonderful. And that's great. But it all begins with us. And we were not always taught. We were always taught that someone else had to save us from something. And then we don't understand how helpless that renders us, where we don't even take the opportunity just to see, if we can save ourselves. So yes, I see Jesus every day when I look in the mirror, because I am my own savior. I am my own redeemer. And I see Jesus when I look at other women that I connect with every day, and frankly, other people that I connect with every day. Everybody don't know that they're their own savior, but I am here to encourage people to see that they actually can save themselves for whatever they need saving from, and they can redeem themselves.
Thank you, Tasha. And I knew you were going to come with it because you really, that coach spirit, that comes across every single time you share. And so I'll pivot to our other spiritual coach, Pastor Bay, if you want to take that question.
Yeah, divine alignment, because I want to tap into what Tasha was saying, that when we hear this word salvation, when we read that in the Bible, it means healing. So I see Jesus in the healing of Black women. And that's why I accepted this invitation, first of all, because I stand Dr. Bryant and Eva, but also, and Jay, but also I need Black women to know that you have options. So in my work as a pastor, people are like, you a pastor? Yes, boo, I am. And I'm formally theologically trained, right? And I read tarot. It's a both and, sis, you got options. And right. So I open the world as the one who's holding space for Black Christian adjacent women, right? Church girls who grew up and was like, why I gotta hate sex? Why I gotta hate gay people? Why is Jesus white? Like all these questions that we have, when Jesus is in fact, was historically a poor North African Jewish revolutionary refugee. And so when I see Jesus, I see Black women on roller skates. I see Black women in bathtubs. I see Black women masturbating. I see us doing all the things that we need to do to be saved, which is to be healed and whole. Black women are healed and whole. Everybody else gonna be healed and whole too.
As you say, Periana, that's period. I'll go ahead and pivot to you, Reverend Dr. Courtney, specifically because I know you talk about the erotic. And since she mentioned masturbation as part of seeing Jesus, I'm like, oh yeah, Courtney's next.
Okay.
okay. So I want to begin with why I'm participating, and I think that the reason that I'm participating, I mean, in addition to the invitation being extended by someone that I appreciate, is simply that I think that these kinds of conversations are necessary. And I think that they're necessary. I think it's important for us to speak across lines, if you will. I remember coming out of my PhD program, and I went into my PhD program a religious zealot, and there was a real comfort in the certainty of being a religious zealot. And when I went through my PhD program, a lot of the waters of certainty were troubled, both in terms of the framework with which they were approaching religion, but also the ways that they were complicating Christianity in light of the and historical context. I've also been grappling deeply with how to make sense of Christianity as it has been used as a device or weapon against Black people and Blackness in an anti-Black society, and a weapon that has been used to coerce women into subjugation, even in the year 2021. And so I think that these conversations are important, and I am a person who is always, looking for the truth. Now, I have to name, of all the people here, I'm probably one of the few people who still unapologetically identifies with the Christian tradition, and that can be very difficult in light of all of the things that have transpired in Christendom and Christianity. But there is something about Jesus, right? And so that'll flip me into the second question, that there's something about Jesus, there's something compelling about Jesus for all of the reasons that have been named, because we see Jesus when we watch Black women save themselves and each other, because we know that the socio-religious historical context of Jesus is just what Pastor Bay said, right? That he was, in fact, a refugee, a North African, a Jewish person who was dealing with Israeli occupation, or the occupation of Israel by the Roman Empire. And so that it situates us in sort of in that Keynesian way, where we're able to see that God is a God of the oppressed, that God is constantly seeking to free and liberate God's children in whatever way that that might look. And similarly to a conversation that Brittany and I were having yesterday, I once had an encounter with a gentleman who described the Christ event, or the Christ, right, which is different from Jesus, as the word, the logos, the reason, the logic of God. And this logic is a logic of love, from my perspective, unmerited love. And that's something that I think that Christians miss very often, but I also think that it is something that people across religious perspectives miss, because I teach Muslims, I teach Buddhists, I teach Taoists, and somewhere along the line, we have been sold this lie that we have to do something to earn God's love, to earn God's protection. And as a Christian, I have to stand in that, if you will, and say that's what it is, and these are the things that you must do. And so I seek to do away with those kinds of boundaries, those kinds of strictures, and then also just explore with the rest of my spiritual kin, right? What it really looks like, number one, to be free, but number two, to be connected to this thing that we call the divine, right? And we already know we are connected to this thing called the divine, whether we call it the Ifa tradition, whether we call it Islam, whether we call it Christianity. One of the really beautiful things about a lot of religions, Christianity, Islam, and many of the African spiritualities, is this notion of oneness, that no matter what we do, right, whether the deity is being presented in mediums, right, that it still ultimately comes back to this monistic or oneness sort of bent, that you belong to me and I belong to you, and we belong to God and we belong to each other. And so what are the things that we need to put in place? What is the language that we need to put in place so that we begin to see that in each other and to see the divine in each other, as opposed to turning away from one another and saying, well, you're pagan and I'm correct and I'm orthodox. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm participating, and that's where I see Jesus.
Well, thank you for that answer and for that journey, if you will, of really better understanding what really being open means, right? Especially when you think about people coming from the Christian tradition. Iya, I know that that is also part of your background. And so I invite you to share a little bit more about why you say yes to the panel and also answering the other question.
Sure. So one of the reasons I definitely said yes was um I love talking about the divine and like Black women's connection to the divine. Like that's my jam. Like, so I was like, oh, I'm just gonna be able to talk my shit. Yes, love it. Love this for me. And of course I saw, Lyvonne, and that's the homie. So I was like, of course, yes, obviously. Um, and two, the concept of like just thinking about like, have you seen her? Have you seen Jesus? What does that look like? And I haven't been Christian for a while, right? But and I know when I talked with you, Brittany, I was just kind of like, all right, what is this? Like, how can I answer this question? Because like I don't talk to Jesus anymore. Not that I didn't, but in the Christian sense, do I talk to Jesus? No, right? But if I'm looking at it from like what Jesus is as a symbol and represented like in divinity, like I see him her every day, right? Like within myself, within Oshun, like Oshun has saved me. Like I tell people that like literally Oshun has saved my life. And into that end, my godmother has saved my life. Not that I was like out here gonna be like dead on the street, but saved me from myself from being a hot ass mess out here, right? And so like if you're looking for in that terms of like the salvation piece of that, then like that to me would be Oshun for me, right? That's who I'm crowned to and who I work real. She has always walked very closely with me, and I've always been like, I can't even put into words how much like she means to me. And also just like looking at the ways that even working with my ancestors, right? Because my ancestors were Christians. So I still read the Bible to them, right? And the power that is still in that book, but I don't look at it as like the Bible in the way that many Christians do. I look at it as a spell book of sorts, right? And so I'm reading it in order to empower my ancestors because they didn't just die and was like, all right, peace, we're not Christian anymore. No, they're totally Christian. Like, and I respect that and I honor that with them. And so even when I'm sitting down and talking to them and reading Psalms to them, that is in ways that I'm still connected to that part of my family and my lineage. And so I think if we're looking at what Jesus represents in all of that, I think that in all aspects of my life, in many ways, we're still connected to that because what a lot of people don't realize is that the Ifa Isheshe tradition is monotheistic. There is a supreme creator that is Oludumare, right? Like it's the supreme. Yes, we have these manifestations and these deities. So you have like the Orisha, but there is still a supreme oneness, like Courtney said, that we are all connected to. I think a lot of people get caught up with the Orisha, and it's like, I mean, yes, they're great and they're awesome and I love them, but there's also like, I like to call Udumar like big God. There's still big God up there, right? Like there was Jesus and there's big God, and we still have a big God that we answer and pray to as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And yeah, I want to stay with you for a minute because I know Jay in particular, when we were thinking about this space and then thinking about the divine feminine, as we're changing Jesus's pronoun from him to her, people make a lot of assumptions about what a feminine or effeminate deity would be like. And as a priestess of Oshun, I'm curious, and you share with me in our conversation, and I'll invite you to share it in this space about how that's somewhat limiting of femininity and in how we think that a feminine deity would show up. Like people would think that Oshun is nice and sweet. And yeah, she's about the waters and, the sweet rivers, but also like she comes with it. She's not playing around with you. And people always ascribe that to masculinity. But I want to pause a moment for you to speak about that duality, or not even duality, but expansiveness rather.
Yeah, I think, and that's really limiting, like you said, because when we think of not even Oshun, but just like a lot of times I feel like when there are conversations about the divine feminine, it's like pretty and it's like a woman with like curly hair and she's light skinned or like racially ambiguous. Shots fired at self, but like racially ambiguous or whatever. And it's like, I mean, aesthetically, I guess, but then when you unpack that, that still goes back to like whiteness and like racism, because that's not all that femininity is. If you go to Nigeria and you see Oshun, they don't look like me. A lot of them don't, most of them don't look like me, right? And then also with the concept of like what and how Oshun is presented in the media, it's always just like nice and sensual and sweet. And that is part of it. That is a big part of it. But also I tell people that lady not nice. Oshun not nice. She's loving. She's loving. She's kind. She's generous. People want to be coddled. She don't coddle you, right? And a lot of the female Risha don't coddle their kids, right? They just don't, because it's just like, look, I know you're hurting, but if you want to stop crying, this is the shit you got to do to stop crying. And it's hard, but you still have to do it. It's a motherly love, but it's not in the way where it's warm. It can be, but that's not all it is. And so it can be frustrating for me to just see these like portrayals of her as just like, la, da, da. And I'm just like, she be coming with the knife for me. Like, she's not nice, y'all. And she's a warrior, right? So like one thing you have to know, if you know anything about she was one of the first that came here to bring life to this earth, and she was the only woman Orisha that was here. And they were like, fuck you here for? And she was like, oh, for real, that's how you feel? I'm out. Bye. And then she took she left. Everything dried up, because she was the sweet water. She brought that nourishment, because we need water to live, and they didn't appreciate her. So she was like, all right, that's cool. So I'm gonna just go. I'm gonna just go back and take my things with me. And that's very much how she is, right? And she's the defender of her children. She's a warrior. Like, it being kind and loving and beautiful, and also like using your sensuality to get things that you want. There's nothing wrong with that, because that's part of her too, right? Like Ogun was in the woods and they was like, I don't know how we gonna get this, man. She's like, don't you worry about it, I got it. Put some honey on herself, had some bells around her waist, was in the woods like, yeah boy, let's go. And got because they needed Ogun for some stuff. And she was like, it's okay, I'm gonna go get my man, it's all right, let me just put some honey on it and bust it down real quick. So there's just like there's so many aspects of her. And then there's the Oshun where she had nothing and was just washing the white dress in the river. And like, that's eventually how it turned yellow, because she just kept washing and washing. And so there's this aspect of struggle that we all go through, right? Like that's very symbolic of our own struggle, where we need to just keep washing and showing up day after day. So I think like the feminine is just too big to be contained into this little piece of just like sexy, cute, light, and love, because also part of the divine feminine is the dark mother. It's the dark mother, and that's where your shadow work is, right? Oshun also helps you to be self-reflective and see what it is that you need to see. And part of that is seeing your own shit and seeing the shit that you're sitting in. And it's like, so you want these things. I want the money. We all want money. We need money to live, right? But you can't have it if you're not looking and seeing things for what they are. So there's just like all these, and obviously I can go on and on and on, but there's just like all these aspects of just the divine feminine and how they're reflected. Is just not this little thing. It's so big and compartmental. Like you can't compartmentalize it into just like one box, because that's just not it.
Right. That's just not it. And that's not it for femininity, period. So that's why I really wanted you to offer that answer, so people know that you don't have to just be one thing or show up one way. Like we contain multitudes. That wasn't just something somebody wrote. Like that's the truth. That's the fact. I want to give other panelists a chance to jump in on that piece, because I saw you all head nodding and grappling with it before I jump to the next question. If anybody else wants to jump in.
Well, one of the things that I would say about the divine feminine, particularly in Christianity, is that it's very difficult, particularly when we're using pronouns to refer to God. And it's something, even at this point in my career, I still trip over it and say he, I mean God, she, whatever it's going to be. But it's really interesting how biblically there are a lot of feminine references to God, whether it be El Shaddai, which is the many-breasted one, whether it be the spirit actually not having a masculine, it's not masculine, but it's actually neuter, right? Pneuma is not a masculine word in the sense of the Greek, but it is a neuter word. And I think that might be part of why I tend to gravitate to the pneumatological or to the spirit. In the Christian framework, there's God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, and they are all supposed to be one, right? Of the same substance and equal, right? So that there is no subordination where, oh, Jesus is less than the Father, or the Spirit is less than Jesus. But we all know that in practice, the Spirit is in fact subordinated. It's the last thing that people talk about, but it is actually one of the greatest ways that we can perceive the freedom of God in Christian doctrine. And so because of that, because of the way that the Spirit operates, and particularly in my own study, the way that the Spirit functions in tandem with the erotic has me asking all kinds of questions about feminine energy, the ability to seduce, the ability to draw forth, the ability to not quell, but cultivate desire. This is certainly not only divine, but it's a divine gift that I think has been given to women. Now, I know that in the essay Uses of the Erotic by Audre Lorde, she would argue that the erotic is on a spiritual feminine plane. And I'm not quick to embrace that, simply because I believe that men can be erotic as well. And I think that when we do the kind of work where we're siphoning off who can be erotic and who cannot, that can work against us in other ways as women. But this notion of God being both feminine and masculine and moving back and forth, almost in a kind of trans way, is really interesting to think about, because then we can all see divinity in all of us. There tends to be this movement I've noticed where Black women want to take the lot on God, like God is a Black woman. And I feel like that also does us a disservice, because we have to recognize God in all of God's divinity. Now today, certainly, we can glorify and expand how we see God in Black women. But I always think that it's an important framing to remember that God is diverse, and that when we begin to categorize and say that God can just exist in this space, in a male way, in a feminine way, that we ultimately all lose. Now, with that said, there seems to be something about, as I said, God is near the oppressed. And I mean, we know that for many, many years, Black women have been oppressed in the Western world, but globally, women as well have been oppressed. And when we start to think about the fact that the Bible, every single book in the biblical canon is written by men, how can we take their word for what the divine is? Because I don't know about y'all, but my experience of learned men who can write things down, men who feel some modicum of institutional power, tend to wield that power in some uncomfortable ways. Not all, but many. And so with that, I am uncomfortable with the idea of taking their word for what the divine is and what it isn't. And I'd like to see more diverse voices lifting their voices to share with us where they see the divine and in what ways it manifests itself.
That's actually a perfect segue into the second question, and then we'll move into wrapping up. But the story of Jesus and the Christian perspective, as I mentioned, is a launching off point. But when we think about the stories that we know of Jesus, I want to pose to the panel, what part of the Jesus story resonates with you? Whether you believe in that religious tradition or not, I want the miracle workers and the miracle seers among us, which is actually every single person in this group. Hello. But specifically, Tasha and Ia, what is your 5 loaves, 5 fish, feed the 5,000 moment? Or Pastor Bay and Reverend Dr. Courtney, you all are working in ministry and care. Pastor Bay, I know you do a lot with the survivors of sexual assault and sexual abuse. How have you seen that miracle working in your own life? Again, pushing on that notion of divinity being one way, showing up one way, but instead understanding there's a multiplicity amidst divinity. And there's many ways that these miraculous works and these, what we consider biblical works, even still show up in our current time. And I'll let anybody jump in first.
Sure. So I'm spiritually and socially located as a beautiful hybrid of Dr. Bryant and Iya Ashundara. I am a daughter of Oshun, and Shango walks with me. And so I am doing two things: liberating Christianity, one, because it's not the white man's religion, right? It's an African traditional religion that got co-opted and whitewashed. And so when we have that understanding and we go back to, well, what were our ancestors doing before the colonizers brought their white Jesus? Because there's no way blonde hair and blue eyes could survive in the North Africa. It's just not going to happen. So when you find out that Jesus was a nigga, right? Talking to niggas, ain't no white people in the Bible, you get to create an entirely new framework that is focused on your liberation. And so to Dr. Bryant's point about the Holy Spirit, I render the Holy Spirit as a divine feminine being. So when I think about the biblical narrative, and this is where folks, they clutch their pearls. If we look at the conception story of Jesus, according to the biblical narrative, where the Holy Spirit overshadowed Mary and Mary was immaculately impregnated, that means that a divine feminine being and a 13-year-old Black girl consummated to create what we call this Jesus figure. Folks don't like that because a man had nothing to do with it. But then if we go the biological route, which is that Mary did in fact have sex or perhaps was harmed sexually, then we have to talk about how she was not a virgin when she had Jesus. So people like to really uncover the truth of the divine feminine showing up. And so for me, as regenerative power, right? I do not see the divine feminine as a woman. I do not see the divine feminine as femininity, right? Gender is a social construct and it restricts the divine feminine. The fact of the matter is we should all have a blend of divine feminine and divine masculine energy, right? Regardless of how you identify. So for me, the liberation comes in honoring the divine feminine and seeing that, going back to something that you said, Brittany, while we have been living under patriarchal oppression, the divine feminine teaches us that our words are power and that our words are spells. And so I say that society is crumbling. I say that the matriarchy is rising. I'm saying that harmony is our birthright. And so I'll close this part by saying that being able to blend ancient West African traditions like Ifa, and understanding that abundance is my birthright, success is my birthright, joy is my birthright. Those are things that the Christian tradition has historically not taught Black women. We're supposed to hate our flesh, we're supposed to suppress our desires. The church doesn't know what to do with sex beyond heterosexual procreation, right? And so what the divine feminine calls us to do is to own desire, right? Have agency over your body. Know that your womb, if you have a womb, your sacral chakra, that creative energy, that sensual energy, that playful energy, that is absolutely positively sacred. That is absolutely positively a part of your holy expression in the world. So I look at the creation narrative for Jesus biblically, and I problematize that. I honor the divine feminine in all of her glory and in beyond the biblical text, particularly in books like the Apocrypha, which are a set of 14 books in the middle of the Old and New Testaments. And there's a book of Judith, which, let me tell you, shots fired at all this patriarchy. Book of Judith, read that if you haven't. And I do that by embodying my own spiritual practices to honor the divine feminine within me.
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
So my favorite is Nuck If You Buck Jesus, is what I like to call him. I love Nuck If You Buck Jesus because a lot of times, growing up, even in conversations with my own mother today, like in current days, and it's very much turn the other cheek and just forgive, all this forgiveness. And it's always forgiveness of other people. And I always feel like Black people are expected, especially Black women, are always expected to forgive people who have harmed us all the time, right? And not just like my friend hurt my fucking feelings. It's like, no, people who have caused us physical harm, mental harm, spiritual harm, and it's all this forgiveness. And then not even, and if you want to do that, that's fine. I'm not saying you should not forgive people, but it's never like you need to forgive yourself, right? Like forgiving yourself for maybe mistakes that you've made in your life, or allowing certain things, ignoring the red flags, that kind of stuff. And we forget, like, Jesus was not just out here forgiving everybody. My man tore up the temple, right? Nuck if you bug Jesus, throw them bows, Jesus. That's my favorite. That is always my favorite Jesus, my favorite iteration of Jesus, because even then, like, I have to remember, and I like would talk about this sometimes on Twitter, like, y'all got to protect yourself spiritually. Y'all not out here protecting yourself spiritually, right? And if somebody is throwing a shot at you, that doesn't mean that you should just like lay back and take it. No, you have an opportunity, and you have the space and the tools within yourself, right? Because you have to believe in your own power and your own divinity to know that, okay, I can get some herbs and I can make a bath, I could dress a candle, I can talk to my ancestors, I could pull out my Psalms. There's a book that I have on my ancestral altars called The Power of Psalms. And I also have a book called The Magic of Psalms. And that is what I go through for everything. If I need some protection, I feel like I'm being attacked spiritually, I go to that and I read that to my ancestors. And so I feel like remembering that there was an iteration of Christ that was just like not taking shit from people. Like he was like, nah, this shit is fucked up and I'm gonna fuck this shit up too. So I do love, no, that's my miracle. That's my that's my miracle. Jesus is like if you bug Christ. That's what I like to call him.
Well, okay, so for Jesus, for me, and let me just be honest, ladies, I'll say this, since I have left Christianity, Jesus doesn't resonate with me as much. But if I were to consider an aspect of Jesus that I resonate with the most, it is the divine and human form. Okay. And so the whole part of Jesus that says, I came down here to be with y'all. And that's me. That's many of us, and to many people, it sounds a little cocky, but that's the part that resonates with me most is I am a divine in human form. I came here for a purpose. I came here for the purpose of the people, and I am not the only divine in human form. And so another thing that resonates with me when it comes to Jesus is when I was a Christian, we would always say there's power in the blood, right? But we were always talking about the blood of Christ. Outside of Christianity, for me, the power is in the blood for me within my ancestors who go way back beyond the story of Jesus. My ancestors and my bloodline goes back millennia. So the power actually exists in my own blood, in my bloodline, because of my ancestors who lived through me. And collectively, we are all divine in human form, me and my ancestors. And just like Jesus, I came here to do a thing. So that's what the part about Jesus that resonates with me the most is divine in human form. And I came here for a purpose, and you came here for a purpose, and he came here for a purpose, and she came here for a purpose. And let's not be ashamed or even feel like we need to be humble about even saying that. So when I think about God in general, I don't necessarily think about feminine, masculine, whatever. I think everything, the source of everything. And anything that comes outside of that has its identification based on what's already inside source. And so then the masculine is a separation from source, manifested. The feminine is a separation from source, manifested, a portion of that. You are separation from source. I am a separation from source. We all are unique fractals of source, but we carry the power of source within us, which makes us all divine.
I want to double tap on that. Got to.
I knew it, Jay. I was coming to you because I already know. It sounds like that could have come out of your actual mouth. Tasha, thank you for that. I just have to say that. Thank you.
Much. My art journey, so I didn't talk much about it, but like what I've done in the art side is what Tasha is talking about. This idea of presenting oneself as the divine. And it's because I do believe that the Jesus story is a message to us about us being divine. I believe that we have, in the colonial world, misinterpreted that lesson that was coming through this being. We've been taught that it's a man, and my question is maybe something else. But I think it's important to really explore that. And I think this other piece around like the blood and about the Trinity, even that came up before, right? In my view, Christianity or whatever religion offers us an opportunity to explore the science of a thing. I think Trinity, for example, one of the questions I asked was like, in this Christian Bible, we talk about the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And when I went to Ethiopia and I saw the walls, these paintings, so yeah, when you, Oshundara, when you brought that up, I was like, yes, I saw them. But yet, so like, it invited this question into me. It was like, well, what if the Trinity is the Father, the Mother, and the child? What if our ancestors were just super scientific, so scientific that like we use the artistic and spiritual language to help us understand the science that we are processing around us? What if God is simply the quantum fabric of the world? And we've used this language, all of these different kinds of religions are just languages to explain what we're calling divine. And when I think about divinity, I literally think scientifically about what we cannot control. What happens without our manipulation? What we can yield to is what I think about in femininity. Not the necessary, the social construct of femininity, but literally like, what are the things like our earth, like our air, like our water that we actually personally cannot control, but we can work with, manipulate, like we can yield to? So when you said that, Tasha, I was like, that part must. But yeah, that is the exact part of the Jesus story that I resonated with too. I even rewrote my personal story as the Jesus story, my mother being Mary, my father being Joseph, and created a whole art story around it. So I love that answer so much. I had to jump in.
Yeah, and we actually had a question in the chat. We were going to open it up for questions, but we're almost at time. But I will actually pose this to the rest of the panel. So they asked, why is Jesus such a major part of a conversation about the divine feminine? And I will pose that Tasha kind of got us to where we were going. But the reason why we use Jesus as a launching off point is because it's something that's familiar, but it's not the end of the story. And so we really wanted people to grapple with readdressing or reassessing rather what their concept of divinity is and understanding that they possess it within themselves. So when I was young, I used to say, I honor the divinity that resides within me. My family hated that. They were like, oh my gosh, who do you think you are? You're not God. You know, it was a whole thing. And I was like, well, if I am believing, and that's part of what, why would I not possess some level of divinity? But that part is very complicated in the Christian church, because it's like, you're not Jesus, you're not God. Are you having a mental health crisis? That's what you get asked. But instead, understanding that I possess divinity within me. And that is why I'm able to follow my intuition. Though that is what's guiding me, is that I'm a piece of the source. The same thing that this earth is made of is also the thing that I'm made of. So how am I not connected to the divine? I'm inherently connected. And so I will pose that question to you all of when you realize whether you are a Jesus is my jam person like Courtney and I are, or if you have deviated from that framework, when you realize that you were divine. I realized very early, but I also realized that that was not acceptable in Christian spaces for me to assert such a thing. And it's really pushed me to really explore that on my own, but I will also open it up to the group as we come to a close. Courtney, I see your hand up, so I'll go ahead and jump to you.
So I'm just fascinated by what you've said, Brittany, because it's funny to me, because that's exactly what they did to Jesus when he asserted that he was divine, right? He was like, they were like, how dare you? What? Make yourself equal with the Father? Like, what are you doing? But then I'm also reminded of the song Emmanuel, and how it's, you know, it's God with us, God in us revealed in me, right? And so it's interesting to me that church folks want to get upset with us for believing the things that they taught us to sing. right? And for identifying with the exemplar that they told us was the end all be all. But again, going back to this notion that the Christ event is something that is happening over and over again, this revelation of the knowledge and the wisdom of God, and in so doing, being connected to God. Or how about, the Christian doctrine of the Imago Dei, the notion that the image of God resides in us, that we are created in God's image, right? Even if we look at Genesis, it says, let us make man, humanity, in our own image. So of course we're divine. I mean, we are, and this is made clear through empirical evidence, of our experiences. This is made clear in the biblical tradition. This is made clear in theology, in the Christian tradition. But I think that this is also made clear with everything that we do. Our words have power. Our actions create worlds. And it's interesting how in this particular cultural moment, we are becoming so much more attuned to the power that resides in us, and allowing ourselves to trust the God that is in us. Some of us call it intuition, some of us call it discernment. But at the end of the day, we're using all of this different language for the same thing. And that for me, gives me hope, because it's like, okay, yes, you may be a daughter of Oshun. I may be deeply pneumatological and only really rock with the Holy Spirit. Others are super, super Jesus freaks, and every other iteration, beyond. But at the end of the day, the choreography is still the same. We're just using different words for it. And so that means that we are truly connected, that we are truly divine, and that we have divine power to construct a world that, as Iyanla says, finds another way, right? Because the way that we do it now, as Jay says, causes us, it is predicated on us not believing in who we are and what the divine has created us to be.
I love that. I know somebody else has something to say on that. I saw all of y'all leaning forward. So whoever wants to jump in, Tasha, go ahead.
I think the reason why some of the church people have a problem with it has to do with one, Western society, then add the fact that we're Black in Western society, and how that religion was used, to dehumanize us, okay, to make us humble. And so then I think people struggle with the idea of, like, it's easier for them to say, oh, I have God within me, where you're still kind of lending credit to something else outside of you, as opposed to when someone says, I am the God of my life because I have an oversoul, which is my highest self, that is me in my highest form. So I am the God of my life, and what empowers me is being directly connected to source. So people see it differently. Like, it feels more acceptable to say, oh, I have God within me, thus I am divine. But then when you begin to say, I am the God of my life, some people become uncomfortable with that, because what they feel like you're saying is, I am God. And they have always been told that there is this supreme entity that in some way is above them. And with respect to everyone else's path, that is not how I see it. I don't see the God of the Bible or any other God as right here and I'm right here. I see us all as having come from the same source, but certain gods and energies and deities having self-awareness. And in humanity, sometimes self-awareness is delayed, or we're not able to tap into that self-awareness. So the difference for me, the difference between God of the Bible and myself, was he was self-aware long before I was in human form. And that when you start to talk like that, it begins to sound a little bit cocky, to some people and stuff. But honestly, that's what sovereignty is to me, where there is no other God before me. That is me, my oversoul, my highest form, which has its power, and it gets this power from the source of all things, which is where the God of the Bible gets his power from too. So there is no God above me other than the very source that I come from.
So my word for 2021 is sovereignty. So Tasha, I appreciate you, beloved. Because when we look at Black Christians in America, most of us have some experience with the Black church. And the Black church is 85% Black, at least 85% Black women. But Black church leadership is not 85% Black women. And so while I see a question, you know, in the chat about why don't we just abandon Jesus? Why are we trying to reconcile Jesus? I think you got to do what works for you, right? And at the end of the day, I know people who are atheists but love gospel music. I know people who are never going to church again, but they love the politics of Jesus, right? So for me, when I look at the historical framework of this North African revolutionary, and I see an Ifa tradition that has a whole range. I mean, any other religion, right? Like there are thousands of religions in the world. We really got to understand that growing up with a Christian supremacist worldview makes it seem like Christianity is the right path, the only path, and it's just absolutely not. But hip hop womanist scholar Ebony Janice Moore, she talks about Jesus as an expression of Obatala, who is an Orisha that shows up white and is all about peace and justice. And I'm like, that resonates with me. So I am reconciling a bit to be a bridge, right? In this age of T'Challa and Black Panther and people wearing dashikis, even if they were made in China or India, right? I'm like, however you get to your getting, get there. In this world of Beyonce and Lemonade and people being like, oh my God, Oshun, honey, oh my God, like, Ocean children go through hell, okay? Like we got to talk about the reality of it and bring our experience as African descended peoples on this land to the center of our spiritual practices. We cannot have any Eurocentric, westernized, colonized ideology take up space in our churches, our mosques, our temples, our elays, wherever you are. So I'll close this part by saying that understanding African spiritual systems and how women were worshiped and how queer folks were considered the gatekeepers and how children were like fiercely protected, it helps me to build an ethic, an African ethic that says we are not well if all of us are not well. And that is where the divine feminine comes in and says, all this patriarchal bullshit, like we gotta heal this, gotta sit out. And it's not that I want a matriarchy. I would prefer matriarchy to a patriarchy. I want harmony. I want wholeness. I want balance. And I think that's what we get to do in this new iteration of womanism, is to figure out, what does balance look like for us? What does wholeness look like for us? This Black women in luxury, this Black women deserve pleasure movement. I'm here for it because the church taught us that we need to suffer. But when we look at the divine feminine, she teaches us that all of this is our birthright. And we don't beg for blessings, we command our birthright.
Right.
So just really quickly, because I know we're at time, but I just wanted to say, to kind of piggyback off what Lavon was saying, one thing for me as someone who, one, I didn't grow up in a Black church. So I grew up Anglican, I grew up Episcopalian. So that's a very much different experience from folks who grew up in the Black church, even though like my church that I grew up in was mostly West Indian African folks, because that's what we had back in Jamaica and stuff. So with that in mind, I think for me, and even being now a priestess in an African traditional religion, I'm not anti-Jesus, I'm not anti-Christianity. I think you have to find, you have to find what works for you, right? For me, the hands-on work that Shay like requires of me is what I need to be like an active participant in my spiritual practice. And I did not find that in the church. Right. I have to I literally wake up and pray. Like I talk to all my shrines before I leave out the house. That is what is required of me. Right. And I didn't have that. Like it wasn't put on me when I was a Christian, right? And so for me, this is what I need and this is what works for me. And recognizing the divinity in myself was when I left the church and realizing that I could make some shit shake, right? Like lighting a candle, talking to my ancestors, doing some prayers, like realizing that I am an active participant in creating my reality and creating my life along with my ancestors, along with the Orisha, is when I really was like, oh shit, bitch, like you kind of lit out here. You kind of lit out here. It's kind of lit out here. Okay. So I think that Like, and also if you step into an African traditional religion, because I know that's like, people are like, I'm gonna leave the church and I'm gonna go like Isheshe or Lukumi. This shit's not easy. It's not an easier ride. It's not something that's easier because you've left the church, right? It's actually sometimes, I think sometimes harder because it requires a lot more of you, not even just like financially, but just like your time. So don't, take your time if you're thinking about where you need to fit in. I think you should really take your time with that, because one is not easier than the other. One is not better than the other. It's just one might work better for you and what your life requires and what your spirit requires, right? So I just wanted to like just end with that, because I think sometimes people leave the church and they're like, I'm gonna jump into an ATR, and there's nothing wrong with that. You should always come home, but always know that it's not easier. It's not necessarily easier. It's not necessarily like a prettier journey just because of what people share on the internet. And a lot of times I've cried in front of that pot, just me and my pots crying on the floor. And that, and I just had to work through it. So I just wanted to like kind of give that little caveat as well.
I appreciate that, because in my conversation with Tasha, she mentioned like, I am not ascribing to any specific religious practice. I pull bricks and pieces that have brought me home to myself. This is my own personal divinity. And this is what makes up this pot of me, essentially. Tasha, if I'm misconstruing what you said, please correct me.
You're right.
But essentially understanding that that divinity is within you and is you. I'll be clear there. And knowing that you need to construct that as individual as we all are, is as individual as your divine practice and as individual as your divinity. And just like you're talking about Oshun, there's also Yemaya. There's a whole host of Orishas that speak to people, right? And so knowing that you don't have to pick one way, but knowing that there is a source that you're pulling your energy from is the clear piece. And I want to really make that part very clear, because that was Jay's intention with this space, is that there's not one way. And we use Jesus as a launching off point. And I know that there's some complications with that, right? Because of the very complicated nature of Christianity. However, when we're thinking about something that everybody at least has some frame of reference for, that was the baseline, if you will, but is in no way the only baseline. So I want to be clear there. And I also want to go ahead and pivot to Jay to go ahead and close us out with an intention for us to really wrestle with and resonate with, especially with this new moon energy that we have going on.
Thank you, Brittany. Before I did that, I did want to give all of the panelists an opportunity to leave a final seed and a way for people to connect with you. I saw that there were some questions that popped up on both the YouTube live chat as well as this chat. And I believe that there may be people who identify with particular people on the panel and may want to follow up and stay in touch with you. So 2 things. 1, would you be willing to offer a seed? What is the last thing that you want to make sure to offer or plant before you exit today? And then finally, how do people find you?
I'll start. A seed that I want to leave with people is that you are divine, and that your divinity is not in relation to or defined by anything else, but your own personal self-exploration. And that stillness, that time with yourself, that ability to just be invites a level of ease that is indeed our birthright as Black women. And so I invite everyone to hold that space for themselves as we move into a new moon, a new astrological new year, all of the things. And then I can be found on all the socials at ask2_BHB and then another 2_. And all of my stuff is linked out, probably from the main event, but you can find me. I'm easy to find, and wish everyone well. And I'll go ahead and pivot to whoever wants to go next. Iya, you're next to me, or Tasha, if you want to jump in, whoever wants to go next.
So you can find me on Twitter at Bruja Bantan. And it's the same on Instagram, but with an underscore. So at _Bruja Bantan on Twitter. I'll put my website in the Zoom chat because it's a little convoluted, but that's how you can find me. A C that I want to leave you all with is to trust your intuition, and remember that your intuition is your connection to the divine. And when you question your intuition, you are in fact questioning yourself and your trust with yourself, and then you are questioning the divine. So always trust your intuition. And, like Jay had said in the beginning, like do an experiment where you just kind of move in the direction that your intuition asks you to move and see how that flows and see how your life changes. So trust yourself and trust your intuition.
Let me, I'm going to echo what you were saying. I'll leave you with this. Well, first, you can reach me on Facebook at Tasha Matrez. Okay, that's Tasha space Matrez, Matrez. Or you can reach me on Instagram at Spirit Knows Best. Trust yourself and trust your connection to the source of all things. And in trusting, acknowledge your connection. Acknowledge your connection first, then begin to seek that wisdom so that you can build trust in yourself, so that you can then understand what it is that is for you while you're here in this human experience. Because ultimately, it comes down to you and what is best for you. And you will have no way of knowing that if you don't honor your connection and acknowledge that connection and build from there.
Is it my turn? Oh, okay. Wow, there are a couple of things that I want to leave folks with. I do certainly want to reiterate the idea that we are all connected and that we are connected to the divine. But I think I want to say something that's a little bit different and maybe a little bit controversial, because I know that, as if I haven't already, but I know that Christianity gets a bad rap for promoting humility, right? And I know folks don't like it. But I do think that while we are not required to humble ourselves before oppressive forces in the world, that humbling ourselves before the source or the divine is, in fact, the gateway to more knowledge. And so I know that we as Black women get scared of that because of the ways that we've been coerced into accepting all kinds of foolishness. But the power of the divine is not the same as the power of the world. And so I would encourage people to enact humility toward the source as a gateway into a deeper understanding of who the divine is and who you are as divine.
And how folks keep in touch with you, Dr. Bryant?
You can keep in touch with me on Courtney Bryant on Facebook, Theo Erotics, that's THEOR Erotics, on Instagram. No, I'm sorry, not Instagram, on Twitter. And I don't really have people follow me on Instagram. That's just for me, boundaries.
Boundaries. So if you are part of this conversation today, your ancestors are talking to you. And so I want to affirm you and let you know that you are on the right path and that you are being divinely guided. And there might be some stuff going on back here that you're just kind of like, what they said, and oh, I thought the Bible, and and lean into that uneasiness, ask the hard questions. God is big enough for your questions, and you're clearly unfolding to something new. And if you're looking for spaces where you can do this in community, at Lavon P on Instagram, my IGTV is, gems on gems on gems, incredible guest speakers. I'm like looking at y'all like, let me get these folks in the mix. My church is on Instagram Live for now, so get it while you can. Sundays at 11 a.m. ish Eastern Standard Time, the Proverbial Experience, meditation, we pull tarot, it's really beautiful, pour libation, all of that. If you're ready to learn in community, my Patreon is a great place to do that, patreon.com/LavonP. And lastly, if you are ready for a deep dive and you want to do a one-on-one kind of ongoing co-creation, I'm also a spiritual life coach. And so you can calendly.com/LavonP is that link to get started with me there.
Perfect. Thank y'all so much. And so I'll go ahead and close this because I know we are a little bit over and I want to respect everybody's time. So if you do need to jump, speaking specifically to the panelists, I totally understand because we are over. I'm just going to give my seed, set, the teacher version of intentions, and then invite folks over to Clubhouse if they want to come over. So seed from me. I, as I mentioned before, am a teacher. Professionally since I was 22, but in real life since I was 3, and I was the oldest and I could force people to play school. In my practice, I've focused on affirmation of the self, and I've watched that transform people, the way in which we speak affirmation. The seed that I want to plant is, what if you were actually perfect? I know that we have a society, and especially if you grew up in the Christian tradition, the idea is that you are imperfect and you cannot be perfect. But what if you were actually perfect, just the way you are? And the imperfections that we are perceiving are really just about us trying to force fit ourselves to be like something that we're not. There's going to be dissonance when we are different from people. And that dissonance is an invitation for us to explore our truths. It's not about trying to correct somebody else or make yourself different. Is really just about us getting deeper into the perfection that we were born with. So the seed that I offer is, what if you're perfect? I gotta offer one more seed, and that is, anytime that we are in a space where we're trying to debate fact, truth, fiction, etc., I want us to just ask ourselves, number one, where is that coming from and why do I feel the need? Number two, when we are deciding what is truth, what is the source of the truth? Is this truth coming from a space, culture, perspective that loves me, that feeds me, that heals me? Or is this truth coming from a space, perspective, culture that has capitalized off of the control of myself and my people? Always ask that question. One of the things that I used to teach in the school was follow the dollar. Follow the yellow brick road. And if you're seeing some money going a certain way to a certain hue in a certain group, you might want to challenge a little bit harder the relationship that this truth might have to the colonization that was used to control us in the first place. So with that, closing with intention. Now, I, again, am a teacher. So Miss J's way of closing with intention is not to offer my intention, but to ask you to set one for yourself. The questions that I'll ask, number one is, what inspired you today? And given that inspiration, what do you want to do with it? Who do you want to reconnect with? What are the ways that you were challenged that may have made you feel a way that you might want to explore a little bit deeper because you're being invited to? But most importantly, what is the next most immediate step, action step, intention that you want to take for yourself? I encourage you to take that in, write your own intention for this day, this new moon energy that invites our intuition and creativity and love of self and divinity. And yeah, hold that, put it in a space that you can look at it. My way is putting it on the mirror. I write intentions on the mirror and speak them to myself like the pledge. But however works for you. We are going to go over to Clubhouse if you are there. I know that there were some people who had more questions, want to continue. I'm going to be there. Brittany's going to be there. I know some of our panelists cannot be because folks are busy. These are big time people, y'all. So you want to continue in the conversation, we're going to hop over to Clubhouse. And finding me, jaylachey.com. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat. That's going to be the easiest way. Miss J's classroom also has her own stuff, but if you go to Jay Lachey, that's the hub. It has everything.
Do we have the Cash App for the panelists?
Oh, yes. So we are taking donations so that we can give thanks to our panelists and to the folks who have helped us to run this. So we've had folks who are helping us to moderate. We have tech people helping. We have panelists. So We offered the event for free because we didn't want it to be restrictive. We thought this is important. However, if you feel fed or moved, please do donate. Our Cash App is Miss J's Classroom. And I'm going to type that as I'm talking. And we also have a PayPal me. So you can do paypal.me to Miss J's Classroom as well. And everything that you donate today will go to panelists, to the folks who helped to make this happen, because they gave their time so graciously. And I'm eternally thankful. And I also want to say to you directly, I am so moved by y'all. And I'm so thankful that y'all gave your time, not just because of how genius you are and how beautiful you are and how loving you are, but literally because one of my biggest dreams was being able to bridge spaces and bridge topics that for a long time in my life felt like two separate worlds. Like I could go over here to the Christian world and I can go over here to the spiritual science world, but they were never together. But I saw that we're talking about the same things, we're just using different languages. And so what would it look like for us to be in community together, healing together and loving on each other this way? So thank y'all so much for being here and giving your time.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate it. I'm so glad I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you for creating the space. It's been truly filling for me. And I saw the people in the chat saying the same as well. So thank you.
Thank you. This was great. And it was an honor to be with you all today.
Thank you. You too.
Same here.
Thank you.
Deep gratitude.
All right, Jay, I'm starting the room on Clubhouse. Thanks, y'all, so much. If you want to jump in, the name of the Clubhouse room is Have You Seen Her After Party? So we'll be partying and answer questions. So sounds good. Nice to see all of you. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.